In Gyeongju, the ancient capital of Korea's Silla dynasty, diplomacy and symbolism met under bright autumn skies. The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, or APEC, had drawn regional leaders to the southeastern city, and among the most closely watched encounters was this one, the first official meeting between South Korean President Jae Myung and Japan's newly elected Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. The moment was brief but meaningful, a firm handshake, two practiced smiles and cameras clicking as their entourages looked on. Yet behind that simple gesture lay decades of friction and generations of memory. For both Seoul and Tokyo, reconciliation has always been more marathon than sprint. When Jae Myung greeted Takaichi at the entrance of the summit venue, his words were measured, his tone deliberate. It was the kind of choreography that diplomats understand instinctively. Every step, every nod, every second of eye contact carefully weighed. For South Korea, this was an opportunity to confirm leadership stability and signal openness. For Japan, it was the debut of a leader stepping into the international spotlight for the first time as Prime Minister. Sanae Takaichi, the first woman ever to hold Japan's highest office, inherits a complex diplomatic landscape. Her rise followed years of domestic debate over defense reform, economic stagnation, and regional realignment. She faces the same test that many Japanese leaders before her have confronted: how to manage relations with South Korea while maintaining Tokyo's position on historical issues that still stir emotion across the region. As they took their seats across a polished table lined with small flags, the atmosphere seemed formal, almost cautious. Cameras captured the two leaders exchanging introductory remarks before the press pool was escorted out. Behind closed doors, the tone reportedly shifted to something more candid, a conversation focused less on history and more on the future. According to aides from both sides, the agenda centered on three main themes: regional security coordination, economic resilience, and preparation for next year's trilateral summit with the United States. The phrase used most often by both delegations was forward-looking cooperation. It's a diplomatic cliché, but here it carries weight. For years, Japan and South Korea have wrestled with the legacy of their shared past, from wartime labor compensation to export disputes and territorial claims over the rocky islets known as Dokdo in Korean and Takeshima in Japanese. Yet the global landscape of 2025 leaves little room for old grudges. With rising geopolitical competition and a fragile global economy, both governments know that partnership is not just desirable, it's necessary. President Lee, whose own political rise was fueled by promises of pragmatic engagement, has sought to balance public sentiment with strategic need. His administration has quietly worked to repair the damage left by trade restrictions and to restore normal exchanges between the two countries' business sectors. Japan, under Takaichi, appears willing to reciprocate, though carefully mindful of conservative voices at home who demand firmness over apology. In recent years, both nations have discovered how interdependent their economies truly are. Japan remains South Korea's third-largest trading partner, providing critical components for semiconductor manufacturing, precision machinery, and advanced materials. South Korea, in turn, has become a vital player in the global battery and technology supply chains that Japan depends on. Even small disruptions between the two can echo across global markets.
거기다가 대한민국 방문을 우리 국민들과 함께 환영합니다.
그리고 제가 추천기로 심한 것에 대해서도 축하 말씀 주셔서 정말로 감사합니다. APEC 감사합니다. 이주변 대통령님께서 이렇게 좋은 눈은 조금 늦었습니다만 올해 6월달에 대통령으로 출마하신 것에 대해.
That reality has encouraged quiet cooperation behind the scenes. Talks about a potential semiconductor stability pact, an emergency mechanism to coordinate production and supply in the event of future disruptions, have reportedly been underway since early autumn. If finalized, such an agreement could serve as a model for regional economic security partnerships. The Gyeongju meeting also unfolded against a broader backdrop: the shifting balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. Both Japan and South Korea are treaty allies of the United States, but both maintain significant trade exposure to China. As tensions rise between Washington and Beijing, middle powers like Tokyo and Seoul find themselves walking a diplomatic tightrope, balancing values with interests, alliances with autonomy. Prime Minister Takaichi's government has already indicated it will continue Japan's policy of strengthening defence capabilities and expanding regional engagement. Her message in Gyeongju echoed that stance. Japan seeks peace through preparedness, cooperation through strength. President Lee, meanwhile, has emphasized that security on the Korean peninsula must include dialogue as well as deterrence, a reflection of Seoul's ongoing efforts to manage relations with North Korea without alienating its allies. Both leaders share a mutual concern over Pyongyang's expanding missile program. Recent satellite images suggest continued testing of solid fuel systems capable of longer ranges, including possible submarine-based launches. Japan and South Korea have resumed trilateral intelligence sharing with the United States to track these developments more closely. Their renewed communication channels mark a significant reversal from just a few years ago, when mistrust had all but frozen military cooperation. For President Lee, the diplomatic calculus extends beyond security. South Korea's economy, powered by exports and innovation, depends on predictable regional trade conditions. Any escalation, whether from North Korean provocations or supply chain disruptions, could ripple through markets and public opinion alike. That's why Lee's office describes his outreach to Japan as strategic pragmatism, not reconciliation for its own sake. For Takaichi, the stakes are no less personal. As Japan's first female leader, she faces scrutiny not only from political rivals, but from a society still adjusting to the idea of a woman steering the nation's foreign and defence policy. Her performance on the international stage is watched closely at home. Her decision to prioritise a bilateral meeting with South Korea at APEC, even before separate sessions with other key partners, underscores her intent to redefine Japan's diplomacy in the region. Observers note that Takaichi's political ideology remains firmly conservative, particularly on constitutional reform and defence. Yet her early gestures suggest a pragmatic streak when it comes to economics and regional relations. The symbolism of Gyeongju, a city representing Korea's cultural heritage and Japan's historical ties, was not lost on her delegation. Diplomacy, after all, often depends as much on setting as on substance. Beyond the immediate optics, this meeting reflects a broader transformation underway across Asia. The Indo-Pacific is becoming more multipolar, with nations seeking diversified partnerships. South Korea's outreach to Southeast Asia and Japan's growing cooperation with India illustrate this shift. Both Tokyo and Seoul now speak of economic security, not as a slogan, but as a framework, one that links trade, technology and defense under a single strategic logic.
節目です。これまで築かれてきた日韓関係の基盤に基づきまして、
저와 대통령님 사이에서 잘 소통해 나갈 수 있으면 좋겠습니다. 오늘
地元であります奈良と同様、古代東アジアの
Inside the APEC halls, the mood was cautiously optimistic. Delegations from Australia, Vietnam and Indonesia welcomed signs of Japan-Korea cooperation, seeing it as stabilizing for the region. US officials publicly praised the encounter, calling it an encouraging signal for Indo-Pacific unity. Chinese state media, however, viewed it differently, framing it as an alignment within the American alliance network, a phrase that hints at Beijing's unease. Still, both leaders appeared determined to maintain autonomy. Jae Myung's administration continues to emphasize balanced diplomacy, working with the United States on defense while preserving trade access to China. Takaichi, for her part, has voiced commitment to Japan's independent strategic identity even within the US alliance structure. In that sense, both leaders face the same dilemma: how to act as reliable allies without becoming predictable followers. As the meeting progressed, small gestures spoke volumes. Takaichi's subtle nods as President Lee spoke, the shared laughter over a translated remark, the quiet rhythm of note-taking, all reflected a willingness to listen rather than lecture. Diplomats who witnessed the exchange described it as cordial, focused and forward-driven. After the meeting, both sides issued concise statements. Seoul described the discussion as a reaffirmation of the will to cooperate. Tokyo called it constructive and meaningful. No joint communiqué was released. a reminder that trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. Yet even the absence of disagreement in the official language was viewed as progress. Beyond the bilateral issues, the APEC Summit itself highlighted how economic diplomacy increasingly dominates regional politics. From green energy cooperation to digital trade governance, Asia's economies are intertwining faster than their politics. Both Japan and South Korea see opportunity in leading the region's technological transformation, particularly in areas like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and renewable infrastructure. The Gyeongju meeting may eventually be remembered less for its handshakes and more for the groundwork it laid in these emerging fields. Analysts in Seoul suggest that the meeting could also revive cultural exchanges, programs paused during the years of political chill. Tourism flows between Japan and South Korea have already begun recovering, with visitor numbers surpassing pre-pandemic levels. Business chambers from both nations are pushing for relaxed visa frameworks and joint innovation funds to accelerate cooperation in green technology and creative industries. Meanwhile, domestic politics in both countries remain delicate. President Lee faces a divided parliament, with opposition lawmakers wary of appearing too conciliatory toward Japan. Takaichi must navigate a ruling coalition that includes nationalist factions resistant to what they view as historical compromise. Both leaders therefore proceed carefully, mindful that public perception at home can undo months of diplomatic effort abroad. In this sense, Gyeongju offered not resolution, but rehearsal, an early test of tone, language, and symbolism. For viewers watching across Asia, the sight of two neighbours exchanging words instead of warnings carried its own quiet message. That dialogue, even when modest, remains the only sustainable path forward. Experts in Tokyo and Seoul agree on one point. The world's current volatility makes regional cooperation imperative. Whether it's climate adaptation, supply chain logistics, or the governance of emerging technologies, neither Japan nor South Korea can afford isolation. Their shared democratic institutions and advanced economies position them as natural partners, even when history complicates the narrative. As the session drew to a close, aides exchanged documents for future consultations, and the two leaders rose from their seats. The handshake that began the meeting was repeated, this time more relaxed, accompanied by brief smiles that seemed genuine rather than rehearsed. The cameras returned, capturing a tableau designed to reassure audiences at home. Dialogue is underway, differences are being managed, and diplomacy is alive. For Sanae Takaichi, it was a confident debut, her first major international appearance, handled with composure and restraint. For Jae Myung, it was a validation of his regional strategy, to position South Korea as a bridge between powers rather than a pawn among them. And for the region, it was a reminder that diplomacy in East Asia, while often slow, continues to evolve. The Gyeongju Summit thus stands as more than a footnote in diplomatic protocol. It reflects a moment when both Tokyo and Seoul recognize that cooperation, however imperfect, is their best hedge against uncertainty. As global supply chains shift and new security alliances form, this renewed dialogue may yet shape how East Asia defines stability in the years ahead. When the meeting ended and the delegations departed, the flags of both nations remained on the table, standing side by side, unmoved. It was a quiet image, but perhaps the most telling one. In those two flags, fluttering slightly under the air-conditioned hum of the conference room, lay the story of two nations learning once again to face the future together. In the end, diplomacy is rarely about grand declarations. It's about gestures, the willingness to sit across from one another, to listen, to disagree respectfully, and to keep talking. And that, above all, was what Gyeongju delivered. As the summit concluded and the lights dimmed over the exhibition halls, the echo of that handshake, steady, deliberate, and hopeful, lingered longer than the speeches. In a region shaped by history but defined by its future, this meeting may well mark the quiet return of cooperation between Japan and South Korea. Two democracies, two economies, and two peoples who, after decades of distance, are learning once again the language of dialogue.